So here's the question. How will Mattis's relationship with Trump unfold? Can they agree to disagree on some things? Here now to weigh in, I want to bring in the Institute for the Study of War naval analyst, Chris Harmer. And Chris, as we wait to see the swearing-in ceremony begin for James Mattis, he really is the man of the hour, but really the man of the week, because NATO seems to be a group that Donald Trump has said that he has doubts about, but yet Mattis has really reaffirmed that he believes that NATO should be intact and that our relationship with NATO should continue to be strong. Who wins on this one?
Well, I don't think it's a win-lose situation. I think what General Mattis, and now we should call him Secretary Mattis, what Secretary Mattis has spent the last week doing is reaching out to our NATO allies, reassuring them the commitment the United States has to NATO, to the Atlantic Alliance, goes beyond any specific administration. I think there's been a lot of verbal chaos in this election, particularly in this transition, and I think what Secretary Mattis has done is he's cut through that verbal chaos and simply reached out directly to heads of military and heads of civilian departments in our foreign allies throughout NATO and said, look, the United States military has a deep commitment with NATO. We've got a 70-year history there. General Mattis, Secretary Mattis, excuse me, has described that as the most successful military alliance in history. And so we're reaffirming that commitment. And so when you cut through all that verbal chaos, you get right down to the facts of the case. The United States and NATO alliance is as strong as it's ever been, and Secretary Mattis is going to work on continuing to strengthen that relationship.
Well, let me ask you about that, because we don't. One of the things that we do know about soon-to-be Secretary Mattis, of course, after this ceremony that we're going to witness live on our televisions, is the fact that he does believe strongly in the military. He wants to see the military strengthened and built up. We do know that President Trump has voiced his opinion that the military should be stronger. But what does that mean in dollars and cents? What do you think that we will see as far as financial support for building up the nation's military, in particular with the fight against ISIS?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the best lessons I ever learned regarding strategic planning and strategic outlook is your budget is your policy. When you cut through all that rhetoric, all that chaos, how the nation allocates its funding towards the military, that determines what our policy options are. And we spent the last 8 years on a gradually decreasing expenditure for the Department of Defense. The U.S. Navy is at its numerically smallest point since well before World War II. All of the services are hurting in terms of readiness. All of the services are hurting in terms of materiel readiness. All of the services have expressed a need to grow their end strength. So you cut through all that, and the nation, the United States, the taxpayers, we need to allocate more money to the Department of Defense, or we need to significantly reduce our commitments. I think Secretary Mattis, and it's difficult for me to break the habit of calling him General Mattis, but Secretary Mattis is going to cut through that verbal chaos and just tell Congress, look, if you want to follow up this rhetoric, if you want to follow up our international commitments, you better be willing to write a check towards that bottom line. Otherwise, it's just a lot of empty talk. The biggest bill we're facing in the very near future is what we call the block obsolescence of the U.S. Navy ballistic missile submarines. We got to buy 12 brand new ballistic missile submarines over the next 12 to 15 years. That's going to run us about $100 billion. These are the types of budget fights, I think, that are going to determine what is our actual policy. If you want a sea-based nuclear deterrence, that's the price tag. So
well,
I think there's a lot of...
I think that's going to be the question mark, in particular with ISIS, is it by land or by sea, to most simplistic terms here. Chris, I do want to let you know and let our viewers know that we're expecting at any moment for General Mattis, of course, to come in, and we're going to have the swearing-in ceremony at any moment. President Trump is there, as well as Vice President Mike Pence there as well for this ceremony. So, Chris, I just want to let you know that I may have to interrupt you at any moment, but
Absolutely.
I want to ask you about the issue of torture, because, on the campaign trail, we saw a little bit of a flip-flop with Donald Trump. At one point, he said that he was okay with torture. Recently, this week, he said maybe he wasn't so much. But General Mattis seems to believe in torture, and it seems to us, from the rhetoric and the language and the attitude that we've heard from Donald Trump this week, in particular, when he sat down with Sean Hannity, is that he was going to take General, now soon-to-be Secretary Mattis's direction on the issue of torture. But torture internationally is against the law. Where do you think this all falls in the grand scheme of things?
I think in the heat of moment, a lot of people say that they would be in favor of torture or they would accept torture under very specific circumstances. But when you look at it from a macro perspective, what we get out of torture is so small and the cost we pay is so high. We lose international moral standing. We lose cooperation with our alliances. We play into the narrative that's pitched by both ISIS and al-Qaeda of America as a neo-colonial empire. So under very specific circumstances, while we might gain a small amount of actionable intelligence out of the use of torture, I think over the long term we lose so much more. And I think that's why most senior military leadership, Secretary Mattis included, has come out against that. There's nobody in the United States who suffered more torture than Senator John McCain, 7-year veteran of the Hanoi Hilton. He was kept in isolation for 2 years, tortured on a daily basis. He has been consistently and adamantly against the use of torture, specifically because he says they never got anything useful out of him until well after the expiration date on what he knew. My point is, I think the way that this is going to shake out, and I think most strategists like me come down on this side, you might get something good out of torture, but you'll lose so much more that it's just not worth it.